Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, the oldest fishing village in America tries to carve out a sustainable future. We talked to 3 participants ahead of a community conversation about opportunities and long-standing roadblocks in Mayport Village. Later in the program, a professor who believes we can learn more about the present from the first 100 years of American history than all the news headlines combined. We preview a live local performance of the History That Doesn't Suck podcast. But first, it's a transportation hub, home to iconic seafood restaurants, and located next door to the region's largest employer. But despite those assets, efforts to revitalize Mayport Village have languished. My guests today hope that may be changing. Here to discuss it, I'm joined by Nancy Powell, Executive Director of Scenic Jacksonville. Good morning, Nancy.
Good morning.
Bill Gulliford, former City Council President, Atlantic Beach Mayor, and board member with the Mayport Waterfront Partnership. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, Ann.
And Dr. Georgette Dumont, Associate Professor at UNF and moderator of next week's discussion about Mayport Village. Good morning. Welcome back, Georgette.
Good morning, Ann.
So, Georgette, why is now the time for a community conversation?
We being Jacksonville and Mayport Village in particular, are at the cusp of really breaking out, per se. And you see a lot of momentum in Jacksonville. You see it with the population boom that we're getting into the city. And Mayport Village is it is a charm of Jacksonville that could really help Jacksonville as a whole, as well, with some identity. The history of Mayport Village and the potential with the fishing, with shopping, coffee shops, and everybody knows about the Mayport Ferry. And it's at a crucial location, right at the crux of A1A where it stops. You got to take the ferry to get to the other side of A1A. And there's so much potential there. And we see it kind of growing within the area. And Mayport Village has a chance to finally get over and pop and the goal of the panel is really to put a spotlight onto Mayport Village and to let individuals know how they can be involved with moving Mayport Village forward in a way that honors its history, respects its residents, and still gets it to go into the future to be an even better place based off of its history, its past.
Bill, let's talk a little bit about the history because obviously there is a long, rich history of Mayport Village and the land that, even before that, when it was occupied by Timucuan Indian,
Right.
the Mocama, I guess, that lived there back before Jean Ribault landed. And so there's, hundreds of years of history in Mayport Village, but we often think about it in the terms of kind of the fishing history of Mayport Village. And that goes back, I guess, until the early 1800s.
Oh, gee, I think it went even further than that. I mean, remember the French settled there in 1562, 3 years before the Spanish settled in St. Augustine. And from that point on, actually, there are Spanish soldiers buried in Mayport. And that history started after they threw the French out and continued up until the present day. And so I suspect on an informal basis, you certainly had a lot of fishing going on in the early days. And I think, the negative part of it is that the Navy had to take a good bit of the property there, and that sort of suppressed the Mayport Village. But I think the biggest impediment was when Jacksport decided to try and put a cruise terminal there. And so for 10 years or so, that they bought up all the property, and that property just languished. And
I want to get into the cruise ship history a little bit more deeply, but start back a little bit with Mayport, the arrival of the naval base, because for a long time, Mayport Village was a much larger
area,
parcel.
yes.
Yeah, and it also really connected to East Mayport. I mean, it was part of this whole community.
Went all the way to the coast.
Right.
You're absolutely right.
And so when the base was put there kind of right after Pearl Harbor, yeah?
Yeah, actually, I think it started pre-Pearl Harbor, but it was very close to the start of the Second World War, and of course it continued to grow, and that there were carriers there at one time, so it became a significant base for the Navy. You mentioned areas that they took over, one of which is the land that the lighthouse sits on, which has always been an issue. We've always wanted to gain access to it, or most lately we're talking about moving the lighthouse to the riverfront. There's a very aggressive group that is pursuing that. I hope they're successful.
And people who aren't familiar, the lighthouse sort of sits right beyond the fence that
Yes.
encloses the naval station, and so you can see it, but you can't access
The,
it.
the Navy has refused to let us access. It has sensitive equipment in that area, and they just don't want to open it up to the public. So I can understand that. So the best alternative would be to move it if that's possible. It's possible. It's just expensive.
And so this is now, generations of kind of shrimp fishermen were based in Mayport, and even after the naval base arrived, Mayport Village continued to be a thriving fishing
Very much
village.
so. Very much
Um,
so. I grew up at the beach, and I can remember kids that went to school with me from Mayport, and they were all fishermen. They were all part of a fishing community there, and it was very active.
So this is, as Georgette said, it's also home to the ferry,
Right.
and that's been a kind of critical piece of infrastructure, but not without issue. I mean, it has been occasionally eyed for decommissioning. There was this whole kind of hot potato thing that happened. Like, who's going to pay for it? Is it the states? Is it the cities?
Well,
Should Jacksport run it? Now JTA runs it. What's the deal with the ferry? Just kind of bring us to.
real quickly,
Mhm.
the state decided to dump it in the city's lap. So I don't know why the city didn't resist it. So the city takes it over, and they get Jacksport to handle it for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, Jacksport says, we don't want it. And I was on the council at that time, and we were looking at the possibility that the ferry would be shut down, which would be horrible. So we passed legislation and created a ferry commission to run it. And thankfully, JTA took the ferry over and has done an outstanding job of upgrading. And now they're going to have a second ferry because, frankly, if that ferry had shut down, Mayport would have been a little community at the end of the road and not very successful in that kind of an environment. So, yeah, ferry is very important, I think, to Mayport. And we have people that come just to ride on the ferry. I met some people from Tennessee that they said every time they go south, they come by way of the ferry.
Sure. And, shutting it down is a giant round trip for people, Nancy, if they're,
You know,
instead of, a mile trip across the ferry, it becomes a 24-mile, kind of one-way trip where you have to go over the Dames Point Bridge and up Heckscher, and it is a roundabout. But the state hasn't always believed that even though it's part of A1A, that it is an essential piece of infrastructure. And so that debate hopefully is behind us.
We hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, because one of our events, we did ride the ferry over to the other side, and people really enjoyed it. And
Yeah.
some people use it as a transportation, as a commuter up to Amelia Island. It's a gateway to the Timucuan Preserve on both sides of the river. And it's now called the Jimmy Buffett Memorial Highway.
Right.
So it is there are scenic organizations, scenic A1A organizations that are dedicated to beautifying and promoting those, A1A. Some people just travel A1A,
Yeah.
all the way down Florida.
Yeah.
And so getting across at that point is really important. And it's a 5-minute ride.
Right. And what is Scenic Jacksonville's interest in particular in this little corner of Northeast Florida?
Well, we chose Mayport. This is the second year of this program called Scenic Visions. So some of your listeners know that our annual signature event is something called the Great City Symposium, where we bring in a speaker from out of town and have a big event once a year to talk about how downtowns and cities thrive. And a few years ago, we thought we'd like to take it down to the neighborhood level and introduce people to areas that maybe they've been to a long time ago, maybe they've never been, or areas like Arlington, which was our first one, and Mayport, which have deep cultural history and efforts already underway by existing organizations. So we're not interested in, telling other neighborhoods how to revitalize, but we would like to just shine a spotlight on those by working with the organizations. And in this case, in last year too, we had 2 experiential events. So we had a trolley tour and a walking tour with OSearch and the ferry and the Timucuan people, the Timucuan Parks Foundation. And then we conclude with a panel discussion, which is more of a civic event. And it's next Wednesday at 5:30, November 12th. And Georgette is agreed to be our panelist, our moderator, and Bill is one of the panelists. We also have Chris Fisher from OSearch. So OSearch is another big part of the future of Mayport, and that's one of the things that really sparked our interest, is that there are lots of existing momentum happening already, and it does need some more, but it's not like there isn't a lot of people working towards improvement.
Right. And we should say that event is at the Bill Gulliford Community Center,
Whatever.
named for our guest.
It's still not getting me a discount at Starbucks.
Well, there's no Starbucks yet in Mayport, but there is.
No, but it will be.
Yeah, Georgette, there is, though, some new investment in Mayport. I mean, OSearch is a big part of it because the promise of that research center, which, their boat is based there, they're partnering with Jacksonville University. So there is this sort of like huge educational potential. But they're still in the fundraising stages in terms of building that permanent facility. Is that correct?
I believe they are. And so we have the research piece, and then there's also the business piece and how we want the waterfront there to be able to be utilized in a way that's true to the area's history. So how do we get businesses there? There's a very successful little local coffee shop. And they have a standing room only.
Coconut Key.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like parcel by parcel at the moment with development coming in. And so OSearch is there that's that research and the scientific piece. And then then we see a business piece, and then we can see the development within, like just having more families and parks and more multi-transportation, so sidewalks and bikes and all that stuff. So it's a beautiful little gem. One of the key pieces is there aren't many fishing villages left in the U.S.
Yeah.
Small little fishing villages.
Yeah.
I'm from New England, and I come from it's a lot of fishing up there. Little tiny small fishing villages. You don't see that anymore, and so that is something that is really critical to try and keep there.
Really
and
special.
It can draw in. It can draw in visitors. It can draw in just people who already live in Jacksonville to see what's right in their backyard.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, we are talking to Nancy Powell, Bill Gulliford, and Georgette Dumont about plans to revitalize historic Mayport Village. If you have memories of Mayport or thoughts about how and what would lure you back, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. We have a question from Denise saying, ask Mr. Gulliford to talk about the Mayport Waterfront Market on the banks of the St. Johns River in, quote, downtown Mayport. So this is a new thing that got kicked off just last month.
Yes, and thus far it seems like it's going to be very successful, and we're doing it once a month, and I think you'll see a bigger effort in 2026 because they're just feeling their way along, and Mitch Reeves, our chairman, has really been instrumental in getting that up and going. And I
This
think
is like a once a month market?
and it's in part of the open area. The 7 acres is basically open right now, except for the buildings at 4610. But it's wide open, and I would encourage people to come because we think it'll grow even bigger.
And it's my understanding that's going to be on the third weekend of the month?
I think that's what it is.
Okay.
I haven't been able to go yet. I've had conflict every time that they've done it, but next one I'm going.
It's the third Saturday of each
Yeah,
month.
third
Yeah.
Saturday. That's right. And so the first one in October. So you talk about that land bill, and that address in particular is something that people who are familiar with Mayport will recognize because that was a really crucial piece of land. And I just want to kind of go back into the history a little bit because that area that is open right now is land that was given to Jacksport when they agreed to take on the ferry back in the day when the city couldn't afford it, and Jacksport kind of acquired some property from the city and from some private owners.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
they planned to put a cruise ship terminal.
Right.
And this would have been an enormous cruise ship, as cruise ships are, but this would have really almost dwarfed the city, the village itself.
Right. Well, when I was on the council, I want to give accolades to Eric Green. Eric Green and I got together and figured out how we could possibly transfer the ownership of that property to the city of Jacksonville.
Remind us, Eric Green.
Oh, the CEO for Jacksport.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were able to come up with an agreement that transferred the property. It also had a provision in there where Jacksport and the city would share 50/50 any net gain on sale or lease of the properties or properties. And so that gave us a starting point for development. I mean, basically, the city has nothing invested in that property. And of course, then we went and I heard Chris Fisher, and I said, we got to have that guy in here. And we need, so
Chris Fisher from OSearch.
From OSearch. We approached him. I approached him about the possibility of locating in Mayport, and I was able to get my colleagues to agree to lease property to them. And also the city has provided a dock that's now fully built. And that's where OSearch ties up. They have $10,500,000 from the state that is available to build a research facility. They need more. You mentioned funding and raising money. Yes, they need to raise more money. Anybody out there that's listening that wants to give a big chunk of money to OSearch is going to have an impact that nobody can anticipate on this area. I mean, he is into great white sharks, but it's going to be even more than that in the future. That's just because they're the apex predator. And so Chris Fisher is a visionary, OSearch's leader, and I think you're going to see incredible impact. Do you know they have over 1 billion hits on their app, on their
the shark
phone
tracking app?
The shark tracking
People
app.
who don't know OSearch, they go out and they kind of land sharks, they tag them, they track them, and then they also do a lot of science around their habitat loss or, kind of how they're doing. And so that facility, once it's built out, will, as we said, kind of have this educational aspect because JU's involved.
Exactly. I mean, Chris told me that they have people who will drive 200 miles just to meet the vessel and see what they're doing. And it's an incredible draw. So
and Chris is going to be on the panel next week.
Yeah.
So
Right.
you get to hear directly from him.
Exactly. That's a good point. He's truly a visionary.
So that's the state of the property now, and it is vacant, as you say. But I believe that, and I'm not sure where the funding came from it, but I know that you brought in Haskell to kind of create an idea of how this property could be repurposed, revitalized, and it has a big emphasis on resiliency.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about the realities of climate impact when it comes to Mayport Village, because this is a place that is at the confluence of the St. Johns River, the ocean, the intercoastal. There's marshes all around it. It is tiny. It's right at the edge of, where some big waves can hit. And projections aren't great. When you kind of look, we have, I think, an image of one of the maps that was included in the Haskell report that sort of shows a lot of blue and not a lot of brown, in terms of the future property there. So, first of all, just realistically, when you're looking at Mayport and saying, in 75 years, in 2100, whatever, is there going to be an A1A to reach Mayport? Is it going to be underwater as some projections have it? What will be left of the actual village?
The state is already working on raising the road, the entry point into Mayport, and I've talked to them on several occasions about that, and they're sincere. They recognize the road will actually flood sometimes, so we know that we got an issue there. As you mentioned, Haskell anticipated the need for addressing the resiliency issue, and I think in their master plan they did a pretty good job. I think it's certainly there's potential. Remember, resiliency has to happen out there because the Navy base is so important. And if the Navy base reacts to the need for resiliency, then the surrounding areas are going to have to also be addressed, because if it floods the other areas, it's going to go into the base, is it not?
Yeah.
So I think we've got a safe posture in terms of the future. It's just going to be, where is the money going to come from to address it? That's the big. And this young man from from the University of Georgia did a lot of research on resiliency, et cetera. And I think the outcome was pretty positive as far as the future in that regard.
And when you talk about the Navy, obviously they'll have to make their own plan.
Right.
Their impact is undeniable in terms of the current state of Mayport Village. Have they ever been a resource ever offered to kind of help with the revitalization process, knowing that the location of that base is partly what kind of created this isolated little part of the area? You're
trying to create a guilt trip for the Navy here, Ann.
Why not?
Sure, I understand. No guilt, but they have been cooperative. I mean, in the sense that they attend our meetings. There's a lot of give and take. Each time that there's a new CO, he's made an appearance and made himself available. I think they're a good potential partner and neighbor. I think in the future it'll be even stronger. So and we've yielded to them. We've restricted. They wanted a restriction on height. I think now they're
Right.
restricted to 58 feet, something like that, because of flight
And no
patterns.
cruise ships.
And no cruise ship. I got to believe that if that had ever gotten really, really serious, the Navy would have stepped in and said no anyway. I think it would have represented a horrible security issue.
Yeah, and I guess that's why this overlay that was put in place most recently prevents tall buildings,
Yeah,
prevents
exactly.
a giant cruise ship or any ship that carries more than, I think, like 600
Yeah.
people. Nancy, I want to ask you about the resiliency component, because you've also, Scenic Jacks has worked and helped create the Jacksonville Climate Coalition. You've worked on the Riverfront Parks Initiative. The way that this Haskell plan looks at Mayport is very much about building a green waterfront that is floodable. And so the buildings that they're proposing are kind of on the back end of it. And then there's this whole greenscaped area that has swales, bioswales, and all kinds of stuff. We've had to change the way we think about riverfront parks.
Yeah, I mean, this was very consistent when we started looking at Mayport and saw that action plan, and we know the Haskell folks from the community and all the great work that they've done. So it's perfectly consistent with other parts of coastal Jacksonville, and the downtown riverfront parks have the same issue, and they're building resilience into those parks. It's a buffer. I think that's the approach that a lot of waterfront cities are using the coast as buffer, but when they're not flooded, there are recreational areas, there's Riverwalk. People love to be by the water, right?
Yeah.
That's just and so it can really coexist, and it can coexist with building. There are new building standards for resilience that can protect the first floor, the second floor. We've seen that. So it can coexist with new buildings, and it's a balance but people love riverfront access. And the 7 acres at Mayport, haven't been they haven't been taken, right? So there is opportunity to either parcel by parcel or, all together, create what's the next step as far as doing both of those things, providing access in the docks and the ferry, provide access to. It's a very active boating, fishing already. It's the busiest. The Scanlon boat dock is about the busiest
the boat
fishing.
ramp. Yes, it's the busiest one in Jacksonville by far. Go out there on a weekend and try and launch your boat.
Yeah, it is busy.
Yeah.
We are talking about the future of Mayport Village. We have a question from John on Facebook. He said, or a comment saying, any effort to grow the village, if successful, will likely cause a loss of the culture in trade-off for cookie-cutter housing and McMansions lining the waterfront. I'm sure that is the kind of concern that people who claim generations there have expressed.
Well, what he needs to understand is, first of all, the partnership has control over what gets built. We have to approve things. Even the coffee shop, for instance, that came in, we had to approve the design, et cetera. There is no anticipation of having residential on that parcel, that riverfront parcel. Now, will development have an impact on the surrounding areas? Sure, it will to some extent, but I don't think it's going to be allowed to be built out in a way that would be detrimental to the culture or the history or the community itself. And I think as long as partnerships involved, that won't happen.
What about the fishing industry itself? Georgette, I'll ask you, but I'll ask you as well, Bill. When the port bought all these parcels of land in and around Mayport and agreed to take over the ferry, and then it kind of turned out, well, the land that they've acquired, they want to put a cruise ship on, and then they kind of got rid of the ferry. So there was sort of this transactional thing that happened. Ultimately, they gave that land back to the city, and so that's the land at question. But there are, questions about the future of that land and what is the best use, right? It's obviously, as Bill says, it's going to have to be negotiated through the partnership. What kind of voice are you asking the community to have in weighing in?
Well, there are multiple organizations that the community can engage with. One of them is Mayport Partnership. then they can engage with OSearch. There are just different entities, as well as engaging with Jacksonville City Council. Roy Diamond is the current representative for that area. And so you engage with them, you let them know what you want to see in that area. I like to tell my students that it's best to start with these smaller units. So if you can engage these nonprofits, volunteer with them, go to their meetings, find out what the plans are, and you get to have a say on the front end instead of waiting to the way at the back end when all the work has been done and then you show up at the last minute saying, I don't think I like that idea. So you want to make sure that you get involved early on, be a voice in the process as to what you want to see in your neighborhood, especially for those who live in Mayport, as well as the businesses.
And you
there.
pointed out to me before this show, which is worth noting, that this is part of the consolidated city of Duval County of Jacksonville. It is not part of the beaches communities officially. It's not in the footprint of Atlantic Beach. But I'm curious, what role or what interest has the council member that represents that area, Rory Diamond, had in this process? Has he been participating in these conversations?
To some degree, I would say, but I want to go back quickly to what Georgette and expand on that. The partnership has members that are Mayport residents, and we encourage membership of Mayport residents. We want them to be engaged and involved in decisions made relative to Mayport and how it gets developed in the future, et cetera. So, what do we want it to be? Well, I'll give you my vision. I would ultimately love to see it a cluster of some restaurants, some small shops, maybe a boutique hotel. Remember that 7 acres is shrinking because of our commitment to, say, OSearch, which is going to take part of it, et cetera. So you're not talking about a huge area, but I think it could be attractive enough that it would be really, really what people would desire and hope for in the future.
Well, the event and the community conversation that's coming up, as you said, Nancy, it's Wednesday, November 12th. It's 5:30 to 7:30 at the Gulliford Community Center in Mayport. Thanks so much for coming on today, Nancy Powell, Bill Gulliford, Georgette Dumont. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, we hear why history doesn't suck from the host of the popular podcast. Professor Greg Jackson, thanks so much for being here today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So you have created a wildly successful podcast. It routinely tops the charts for Apple and Spotify. It has been enormously popular. You've produced over 160 episodes. Will you tell us a little bit about how you decided to get into this from a podcasting standpoint in the first place?
Sure. It was 2017. I was a young and idealistic professor here in Utah. And frankly, I wanted to get quality historical, I want to get quality history out to the public in a very accessible way. And I've noticed from the reviews I get in class from my students, they enjoy my storytelling approach. So I decided I would try and launch a podcast in which I would merge my academic rigor that I bring as a PhD tenured professor and merge that with storytelling in podcast form and walk people through the United States history. So episode 1, we meet George Washington as a 22-year-old kid who is absolutely wet behind the ears and thrown into what turns into the first battle of the French and Indian War. And that, of course, leads to the revolution. And then we're off to the races. And here we are now, well over 160 episodes later, and getting into the story of World War II with everything you can think of in between those.
And the title of the podcast is pretty on the nose. What was your experience learning history like?
Well, I personally enjoyed learning history. I was always drawn to the stories. I like connecting with people, and I feel as though that's what we do when we study history, when we do it right, when we don't make it just names and dates, but really get to understand the fears, the anxieties, the joys that the people who came before us felt. They didn't know how it was going to turn out. They weren't living the textbook that we're reading. They had very real stories. That said, being a historian, as much as I love my colleagues, I came to appreciate where people do get turned off by histories that kind of suck the story out of history. And I want to make clear that I'm keeping the story in it. I made this podcast knowing that history lovers would enjoy it, but my goal was to make it enjoyable and fun for people who've had not so great experiences and feel like there's nothing to value there. I wanted to turn that around.
Yeah. Why is it you think that history, when it doesn't do what you're doing and when it doesn't do what it ought to do, why do you think it is taught that way? Because I think it's great that you had great experiences with it, but I think most of us have had at least, 1 or 2 years of history in school that were just really kind of deadening to the subject matter.
Sure. There are a number of factors there. One, when we talk about K through 12, and I'm not trying to point fingers at any school board or teacher, it's just such an incredible lift. You have 9 months in a school year, one period, right, per day. So you've got 5 hours over the course of the week, 9 months, and you're supposed to get kids from the founding of the nation to the present, or even more audacious, you're supposed to get them through world history in a year. That's insane. So you don't have the time to get into the stories. I've had the luxury for the last 8 years of slowly taking my listeners from the Revolution up to World War II. So that not having to deal with those time constraints, it makes it quite different. And the other piece I would say is that when we do academic writing, there is an endeavor, of course, to be, I try to bring this to the podcast, be absolutely objective. Sometimes objectivity then kills the narrative. And I think that there is a space for having a complicated narrative in which we can jump from one perspective to another, and in that way teach and let people understand how various people viewed a moment, but keep the story there.
And storytelling obviously is the foundation of what you do. You begin all of your episodes saying, I'd like to tell you a story. Can you, for people who aren't familiar with the podcast, explain a little bit about the structure and the way that you take it incrementally? It seems to me you do about a decade or so every episode.
Oh, man. It depends on the event. I have times where I'm really into the weeds. For instance, the Civil War, that took me a year to get through, releasing episodes every other week. I think there are about 20 episodes altogether on the Civil War. But the overall in an episode, as I have put this a number of times, I kind of weave back and forth between being the analytical professor who's setting up the scene, and then I'm the storyteller. So for instance, one of my favorite examples is all the way back to episode 2, Patrick Henry and the Stamp Act. No one thinks of the Stamp Act and goes, that's exciting. But it is exciting when we think about a 29-year-old young, wet behind the ears legislator who's giving a fiery, impassioned speech in the House of Burgesses there in Virginia. And as he's getting worked up about these new taxes that are going to be enacted for the first time in colonial America's history ever, Virginia's existed for over a century, and now Parliament is putting a direct tax, which it's never done in the colonies. And he implies that maybe it'd be okay if someone took a shot, maybe off King George III. Cries of treason fill the room. And so I take the listener into this moment, this tense space where the legislature is up in arms. People are yelling and screaming. It's like, the craziest scene you've ever seen happen in our Congress today. But here it is, the same sort of thing happening in the 1760s, and that's what's going to launch us to the revolution. So once I've done that, well, yeah, now let's have a discussion about the Stamp Act and why does this matter? Because now you're invested in Pat, right? You want to know what's going to happen to our buddy Patrick. Now it's worth hearing about all the laws that got him riled up in the first place.
How do you decide what story you're going to focus on? Because there's a million stories in every chunk of history. And some of them, are of rivaling importance. How do you pick?
That is a wonderful question. There is a method to the madness. Part of it is that I am very intentionally trying to provide, basically in podcast form, what you should get in your high school or college education. So I'm hitting those high notes, the things that you would expect. Those stories are going to be there. Specific battles, say Yorktown in the Revolution. That guides a lot of my thinking. But then there's the story within the story, right? So if we go to the Battle of Yorktown, which specific stories am I going to tell? And some of that is, as I'm reading through primary source material, I'm looking for complete tales. I'm looking for people where I can get into the details of their life so that I can convey to you the details of their life and really let you connect with someone who lived through this. Sometimes I'm also very intentionally looking for a story that's outside. So again, this is a luxury I get to have that, instructors simply don't in a school system of any sort. I can slow down and split one event into as many episodes as I want to tell all these rich tales to fill out the tapestry. So then I'll go into, for instance, the Brooklyn Bridge. That's not a crucial piece of American history in that it's something that's covered in a curriculum, but it's such a fascinating story of the Roebling family that basically give themselves to make this bridge. Emily Roebling, the daughter-in-law of the first engineer to work on it, effectively becomes the first woman to be an architect in American history. Hundreds of Italian, English, and other immigrants die building this. And it's an incredible story of sacrifice, bravery, American ingenuity. And I just wanted to tell the story. So episode 92, I indulged in telling it.
I want to drag you a little bit into the present, because obviously you've taken this podcast, you've turned it into a live stage show, and it's this multimedia production. You actually pick up a guitar, but there's musicians, there's a lot of visual elements. A little bit on just how you approached putting something that was just an audio experience into the stage setting, but also why you wanted to do it.
Yeah, wonderful question there. Few things come to mind. First of all, again, remember, I'm a university professor. I was in the classroom for years before I was behind the mic, and I'm an extrovert. So living behind the mic is not the only thing I want to do. I like connecting with the people that I've been effectively teaching. These are, you could say, my students scattered across the country. And it's great to meet people who've been, whether they just started listening to the podcast, sometimes they're introduced to it by showing up to one of my performances, or if they've been listening for years. I enjoy that interaction. And I feel that my time in the classroom definitely helped lay the groundwork for the stage. Also, my garage band days, of course, helped with that whole guitar side
Excellent.
of it. Yeah. But in terms of the images, again, there's a lot of the same curation that goes through in making the audio experience, thinking through images and making maps. We have brought in so much multimedia. We're not just throwing up a map that you would find online. Not that there are amazing maps, but in a nod to an influence and hero of mine, Ken Burns, we've thought through how do we animate our own maps and make sure that it is augmenting what I'm saying at the same time. So we believe it's become a very rich visual and audio experience for attendees.
So not telling you anything you don't know, but these are difficult times for a lot of people who experience the present as if it is a radical departure from everything we've known before. And this is something that you address in your live show. It's something that you allude to a lot in your podcast in terms of just trying to center us in a place that is full of a very volatile history. So, what is it about? I mean, does your knowledge of history make it easier to live in the present?
Absolutely, 100%. And our republic is so much more resilient than the. I want to make clear, I say this without minimizing the very real fears and trepidations that people on both sides of the aisle feel. But our republic is, in fact, so resilient. When you understand this history, when you're familiar with the absolute bloodbaths that have happened in the Capitol between legislators duking it out or just simply assaulting one another. My mind goes to Representative Preston Brooks beating nearly to death abolitionist Senator Charles Sumner. When we think about all the litany of times that states have talked about seceding from the Union, the difficulty of the Union even coming together in the first place. And these are all things that I discuss in the live show. We go in 100 minutes through 100 years of American history, and it's very intentional. I call this live show The Unlikely Union, and talk through how generations of Americans have felt all these same fears. Getting back to the start of our conversation, people in the past, they weren't just names and dates in books. They had fears. They had trepidation. Imagine being a soldier at Gettysburg who manages to survive. 50,000 Americans are maimed, missing, or dead. What hope do you have for the future of the country? And this is the America that would yet go on to become the greatest industrial producer by the end of the century, help defeat Nazism in World War II, right? Achieve the golden age that we often think of that comes in the 20th century. Those best times were still ahead, but that was a very dark period that others had to live through. So when I look at that up and down, the yo-yo of history, and see the ways that our principles, our ideals have absolutely been pushed to the brink, and we have managed to always fight back. Oh, sorry. I managed to get myself choked up there. I think America is a very special place, not because it's simply special because it's ours, but what we've been through, what our ideals are, and we, warts and all, we fight for them. And I don't think this generation's going to give up on them any more than previous have.
Well, I know it's going to be an extraordinary event, and I could talk to you all day about the present and the future, but I appreciate your time today. The performance is at the Ponte Vedra Concert Hall, Saturday, November 8th. Professor Greg Jackson, thanks for the work that you do. Thanks so much for talking to us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much.
And we'll be back in just a minute.
Congaree and Pen, dedicated to agriculture and culinary endeavors, offering field-to-fork dining and outdoor experiences on over 300 acres. Sip, dine, explore. Information at congareeandpen.com. The World Affairs Council presents Headlines and Horizons, making sense of a world in motion, with the Atlantic's Idris Kaloun on November 20th. More information at worldaffairscounciljax.org.
Congress has approved a White House request to eliminate federal funding for public media. NPR and this station remain committed to informing the public, increasing your understanding of the world, and enriching everyday life. But without federal funding, we are relying on your support now more than ever. Please make your gift to this station today. Here's how, and thank you.
Visit wjct.org/sustain and thank you.
On the next Fresh Air, journalist David Graham of The Atlantic on how the groundwork for next year's midterms is already being laid. From new voting restrictions to legal battles and political power plays, his latest piece, The Coming Election Mayhem, looks at what's next. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
It's open enrollment season, and for the 20 million Americans who buy their own health insurance, that means higher prices. Meanwhile, a government shutdown drags on over whether to extend subsidies that make health insurance more affordable. Next time on 1A, how did health insurance get so expensive in the first place? And what you need to know about the costs now.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. A local staging of Porgy and Bess brings talent that's graced stages from Carnegie Hall to Lincoln Center. Here to tell us about it is Kenethia Mitchell, who plays the role of Bess. Good morning, Kenethia.
Good morning.
Miguel Angel Vasquez, actor playing Crown. Good morning, Miguel.
Good morning.
And Patrice Pates? Sorry, Patrice Pates-Eaton. She's the actor playing Maria. Thank you, Patrice, for being here as well.
Thank you.
All right. So, Kenethia, you studied vocal performance at Juilliard. You are a Grammy Award-winning recording artist. What about this show? Have you performed in Porgy and Bess before, or is this the first time?
I have performed in Porgy and Bess, but not as this role.
Okay.
So before I did Clara,
Uh-huh.
but it was over 20 years ago.
Okay.
And when I was asked to do this role, I knew I had a score, but I couldn't find it because it was a long time ago, so I had to buy another.
You're playing Bess. Tell us a little bit about the character.
Well, so I've been going back and forth with this because originally I was seeing Bess the way that the community sees her. It's like this outcast. She's not of the religious nature. But then I kind of looked at it and said, you know what? I'm playing the character from the point of view of somebody else judging her. And so I was judging her as well. And then I realized, no, but in real life, you are not the person that people perceive you as. And so more times than not, you are misunderstood. So I changed my perspective. And I feel like she is a person who does have a soul, and she does have a past, but she's a real person and she has feelings.
Good. That's really interesting. Patrice, tell us a little bit about the setting for this. I mean, it takes place in the 20s. It takes place on kind of a fictional street known as Catfish Row. But tell us a little bit about the setting and the content, like the characters.
Well, growing up in the Black community, we all have a Catfish Row. And so we all know a type of a Bess, we know a type of a Porgy. And in this community, everybody's in everybody's business, which is why Bess is so judged, because a lot of the people in past productions we felt about Bess is that the characters had lived a type of life like Bess, and they have changed their lives, and that's why they're so judgmental of her.
Interesting. And your character is kind of the matriarch of the
Serena is more the matriarch. Mariah owns a shop in the neighborhood. She's in everybody's business. She's everybody's busybody. She's a drunk. She's the mother hen of the neighborhood, but she's not the matriarch. Serena is more the matriarch because she keeps everybody together. She's praying over everybody. She, that ringleader of the neighborhood. Mariah is the other person. If you have an issue, come over here, child. I have a cigarette for you. Let's talk it out.
Miguel, your character is a bit of a heel, not necessarily the nicest person in the show. Tell us a little bit about Crown.
Crown is the epitome of toxic masculinity. He is Bess's lover at the top of the show. He's also kind of a drunk. He's always kind of scrapping and maybe instilling fear on some of the other men. Very macho, but also very possessive. He does get in a fight while under the influence at the top of the show and kills another person, and then kind of has to kind of hide out.
So he's a little bit of a jerk, fair to say, but is he fun to play? It seems like a very rich
Absolutely.
character.
I love playing villains. I think there's so much textures, so much. It's really fun to tap into all of that. And I think I think you also have to kind of bring a little bit of lightness to it. So I kind of lean into the making him a little bit comedic, so he's not necessarily just like a scary presence, but it's like, whoa, okay. I think it makes him a little bit more accessible when you lean into the comedy of it a bit, although he does do some very dark things throughout the show. But it kind of it gives I'm Bess's first huge hurdle in the beginning of the show, and by me having to run away, it gives Porgy the opportunity to try to win over Bess.
And he does. I mean, it is a love story, right? It's George Gershwin's last show that he did for the musical stage, and it is a famous one. It is not without some criticism over the years. The fact that it was, written by a white man, kind of about Black culture, and so is there anything challenging about it, Kenethia, performing, or are you able to kind of approach it just organically?
This is a topic that I was having a discussion with my husband, because when I listen to the music, when I hear all the intricacies, all the dissonances, right, it's very much rooted in that jazz idiom. But by the same token, when I hear arias like My Man's Gone Now and even Summertime, all of these things, they fit so appropriately, I feel like, in the African American community, and just the sound. And so I said to him, I'm like, how did a white man make such beautiful Black people music?
Well, it's going to be a great show. It's at Stage Aurora. We've got a link on our website. Performances this weekend. Kenethia Mitchell, Patrice Pates-Eaton, and Miguel Angel Vasquez. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank
you.
All right. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Ponte Vedra Concert Hall presents History That Doesn't Suck with Professor Greg Jackson, a night of American history telling, live music, and multimedia. Saturday, November 8th at 8 p.m. Tickets and information available at pvconcerthall.com.
This is WJCT News